Okay, so what is pacing? What are we talking about when we talk about pacing? It's not about whether it is fast or slow, whether it's action-packed. It's about this reader experience, this rhythm of the reading that you take your reader through. We're propelling, Shirin used the word propulsion. We're propelling our reader through the story. And as the author, we get to have intentional control over that pacing. How fast do we want those readers turning pages? When do we want them to stop and breathe a little bit? And we get to control that in a number of different ways. And so we're going to talk tonight about a couple of things, the plot pace, but also this idea of emotional pace. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper as we go. So as Shirin rightly said, it's very genre specific. And so part of your job as the creator of this piece of work is to figure out what's just right. There's a Goldilocks principle. What's going to be just right for your book and your reader? So I write mystery suspense. My readers expect to be turning the pages to get to a point in the story where they have to turn quickly to see what happens. There's not a lot of room or not as much room for introspection, for slowing down. Whereas if you're writing something perhaps more literary, you have a little bit more space to kind of guide your reader more slowly through the story. But you still want to keep that pace in terms of wanting your reader to feel like they don't want to put the book down. They want to turn to the next page. They want to read the next chapter. They want to know what's going to happen next. So I've sort of divided this up into kind of three key ingredients that you can add into the recipe for your book to figure out how to control your pacing. So we're going to talk about intrigue, sort of how much does the reader know and when do they know it? And this isn't the case just in mystery and suspense. You'll see that as I sort of unpack this emotional intensity of the story, the stakes and the emotional resonance that keep those readers completely engaged. And then the action versus the introspection that we talked about and how to speed that up and slow that down. So let's look at intrigue first. When you open a book as a reader, you're looking right away for that big story question. What is this book going to be about? What am I reading to find out in this book? And so, as readers, we're looking for that. And your big story question is what's going to hook that reader in right from your early pages and pique their interest and pull them through the story. So in some genres, the big story question is really clear. If it's a romance, are these two mismatched people going to get together by the end of the book? If it's a mystery, is our sleuth, whoever that may be, going to solve the problem for the reader? If we've got Harry Potter, so a children's book, is this strange little boy going to ultimately defeat the darkest wizard ever known? So it's a big story question that gets asked really early in the book, and then usually, honestly, doesn't get answered until very late in the book. So, what are big story questions? I gave some examples for those genres, but will this character find real love, whatever that means for them? Can she forgive this person who wronged her? Can a grief-stricken couple survive an affair? There's a book that I just read recently and loved. Who is this woman and how did she get here? Will the girl get home again? Will he prove its innocence? So you see, there's questions that we're asking at the start of the story that's going to pull the reader in. And so they hook the reader, they spark the reader's curiosity. But what these questions do most of all is they engage the reader's analytical brain. We come to books and we are analyzing all the time, just like we are when we meet people. Whenever we're in a conversation, we're always picking apart what's being said. What do they mean by that? What is she not telling me? And so that it engages our brain and that books do that for the readers. So in mystery, it's very clear. You know, there's a mystery. The reader in that case is trying to outsmart the author by guessing who done it before the author reveals that final clue. But in everything that we read, we're doing that. We are watching what these characters are doing and trying to piece together in our minds this story. And it's that kind of engagement that keeps your readers turning pages. And then this big story question asked very early in the book also pulls your reader like this big magnet all the way through the book until they get the answers that they've been looking for. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. So we have this book, The Martian, and you would expect that to be a pretty fast-paced book. But let's look at this big story question. Here's the very opening paragraph, and you'll forgive my language. I didn't write this, but I'm going to read it to you. So this is it's written, the book is written in log entries. So log entry, Sol 6. I'm pretty much fucked. That's my considered opinion. Fucked. 6 days into what should have been one of the greatest 2 months of my life, and it's turned into a nightmare. I don't even know who'll read this. I guess someone will find it eventually, maybe 100 years from now. For the record, I didn't die on Sol 6. Certainly the rest of the crew thought I did, and I can't blame them. Maybe there'll be a day of national mourning for me, and my Wikipedia page will say, Mark Watney is the only human being to have died on Mars. And it'll be right, probably, because I'll surely die here. Just not on Sol 6, when everyone thinks I did. So here we are. We've got this guy. He's stuck on Mars. I mean, already we're asking questions if you don't know this story. Like, what was he doing on Mars? How come he got stuck there? Where's the crew? What happened? Why did they think that he died? You know, what happened that he didn't die? So we're already, our brains are asking these questions. And the big story question for this book was, will he die? We assume that he will not because he's our protagonist, although probably on the first page you might not yet know this. So the question becomes, how will he survive? And if you know this story, if you know this book or the movie, you'll know that that is the big story question that pulls us through the entire book because he has a plan to survive. And when that fails, he makes a new plan to survive. And when that fails, he makes a new plan to survive. And until that very last minute, you really don't know whether he's going to make it or not. And so that is what pulls us through the story. Okay, so this is a big action-packed space on Mars story. What about something a little bit quieter? Here's Charlotte McConaughey's Wild Dark Shore. Here's the opening scene, and it's from this character Rowan, who we don't know who that is yet. I've hated my mother for most of my life, but is her face I see as I drown. The face I see when I wake from drowning is different. It is rough and wind-bitten and scratchy. It is what I'm looking at when the sudden arrival of pain overcomes me, and I know the image of him will forever be as one with this pain. Whenever I see this face, I will remember the burning sting of being dragged up on rocks and flayed open, left raw. I will feel the bursting pressure in my chest. The sensation will be so vivid, it will be like it's happening all over again. His face, a return, a drowning. Okay, so one short paragraph, so many questions. Who's Rowan? Where is she? What happened to her that she ended up washing up on the shore and being rescued? What's up with her mother? Who is this man who saved her? What is she doing there? But I think the big story question for me is she safe? She's washed up, we learn, on a remote island. Some man with a scratchy beard has rescued her. Is she going to be safe here? And that is, again, the story question that pulls us through this entire book. All these other questions, by the way, also are piquing our interest and also will get answered as the book unfolds. All right, one last one. This is When God Was a Rabbit. So again, this is more literary fiction. So again, it's not just, you know, your mystery, action, thriller, suspense that are have these where we're looking for this pacing issue and this big story question. Here's literary fiction. So I just read this book recently and I absolutely love it. So this is also a book rec along with an example. So the big story question, here we go. This is the opening page of this book. I divide my life into two parts, not really a before and after, more as if they are bookends holding together flaccid years of empty musings, years of the late adolescent or the 20-something whose coat of adulthood simply does not fit. Wandering years I waste no time recalling. I look at photographs from these years and my presence is there, in front of the Eiffel Tower maybe, or the Statue of Liberty, or knee-deep in seawater, waving and smiling. But these experiences, I now know, were greeted with a dull tint of disinterest that made even rainbows appear grey. She featured not at all during this period, and I realized she was the color that was missing. She clasped the years either side of this waiting and held them up as beacons. And when she arrived in class that January morning, it was as if she herself was the new year, the thing that offered me the promise of beyond. But only I could see that. Others bound by convention found her at best laughable and at worst someone to mock. She was of another world, different, but by then, secretly, so was I. She was my missing piece, spelled wrong, and my complement in play. So, a lot of questions in here. Like, who is this girl and why does she feel different? What we really want to know is who is this strange girl who had such a big impact on her life and what happened to her in those interim years? And so those are the questions that pull us through this book. So hopefully I made my point there about starting off with a big story question that's going to pull your reader through the book. So now they're off to the races. They're turning pages and you're planting all these little clues for them and engaging your reader. They're interpreting your words, they're trying to find meaning, they're trying to figure out what's going on. So how do you maintain that momentum? This is me on the left of that roller coaster, by the way, not the woman on the right, smiling and laughing. Once you've got them up to the top of the hill, how do you maintain that momentum in your story? And the answer is we want to look for more questions. So you see in these examples that I showed you, although we have a big question that is going to be answered in the book, we've got lots of little questions. And that uncertainty is what keeps your readers engaged and keep them reading on to get those questions answered. So some of these smaller story questions might be, what is that character's intention in this scene? Why did that character behave that way with this person? What will they do now that this thing has happened? How will they go out? How will they get out of this situation that they now find themselves in? And is that character telling the truth? So there are all these little sort of nuggets of intrigue that you drip through the story that keeps that reader reading on to find answers to those questions. And you can do that in a lot of ways. You can hint at backstory, so the reader's asking, well, what happened to them? I'm going to do that very carefully, which I'll talk about later. But you can hint at something that has happened to them in the past, so that the reader wants to read on and find out what that is and why it relates to the story now. Maybe odd behavior. What is that person hiding? Guarded dialogue. What is that person, that character not saying when they say one thing, but their subtext is something quite different? What are they hiding? Maybe you have notable images that the reader picks up and they're thinking, okay, what does this mean? What is the significance of that? There's all these little dots of intrigue that you can sprinkle through. So some of the places that you might want to think about doing this is when your initial story question perhaps has been answered. If your story starts to feel sluggish, which we'll talk about later, the saggy middle of our book is always a good place to insert new questions for the readers, new reasons for them to keep pushing on. And of course, throughout the book, you can sprinkle these questions. So here is my When God Was a Rabbit again. And this book, again, it's literary fiction. It's very much character driven. It's all about the relationship between these two young girls and what happens to them. But so the friendship develops. It's a strange friendship. One of the girls, Ellie, the main protagonist, moves away to a different part of the country. And they keep this correspondence up for a while by letters and then by phone calls. But at the midpoint, Jenny Penny, the friend character, has a very dysfunctional life that she seems to be functioning very well in, but that has all sort of been set up. So at the midpoint of this book comes this phone call. So, Ellie, I picked up the phone. I knew her number by heart now. It had the rhythm of a poem with all those fives and threes, and it rang briefly and clearly before she answered. It's me, I said, happy to hear my friend's voice. Happy Christmas, Jenny Penny. Ellie, I can't talk for long, she whispered. It was hard to hear what she was saying, so soft was her voice. What's the matter? I said. It's all gone wrong. What? We have to go, she said. When? I said. Now, soon, she said. Why? Because we have to. I don't understand, I said. We just have to, she said. I can't say anything else. I'm not allowed to. She won't let me. But where are you going? I don't know. Mum won't tell me. She said it's best that no one knows. Even me? I said. I've got to go. She's coming. I'll let you know when I get there, she said. Bye, Ellie. The line went dead, and the last of my words disappeared into an unforgiving silence. I summoned my mother, told her what had happened. She didn't know anything for certain, she said, just suspected. We have to wait and see, she said. When they get there, they'll let us know. Get where? I said. To safety, she said. So right here in the middle of this book, again, lots and lots of questions that clearly we understand that Ellie doesn't understand, but her mother knows a lot more. But we have a lot of questions here. What had happened to Jenny Penny? Is she safe? Will she let Ellie know? And then the big question is, will Ellie see her best friend again? So there at the midpoint of the book, just when things could starting to get slow, we have this big question that we read on to find, is she going to ever see this girl, Jenny Penny, again? And that, as the reader, again, it's engaging us. Where our brain is picking up these clues, we're piecing it together, we're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Okay, so our next ingredient in the mix is emotion. And what we're talking about when we talk about emotion is a couple of things. And first up is stakes. So the stakes in the story is what gets the reader invested in our characters, in what's going to happen to them, why it's so important. So I always use this silly example to demonstrate stakes. So there's the question of why should the chicken cross the road? Well, to get to the other side, haha, very funny, it's a joke. But it doesn't really, there's nothing really much at stake there for the chicken. So off he goes to she goes to the other side of the road. But then we add in these little guys. Now we've got something at stake. Now this chicken has a really good reason to get to the other side of the road because her little chicks are over there. Throw in this guy, and suddenly the stakes raise again because these little chicks are in danger. And if that chicken doesn't dodge through all the traffic and get to the other side, things are not going to be good at all. So that's sort of like my example of what stakes mean for a character. It's not just that they want a goal, they've got to have a really good reason that the reader can connect to, a good emotional reason for them to go after this goal. And when we have high stakes, it naturally accelerates that internal clock of the reader. It gets our heart rate up. We want to know something's at stake. We are invested in that reader and their goals and what they want. And we are reading on to find out if they're going to get that thing that they want or need. So stakes are sometimes very clear. So here's the Martian again. And what's at stake for him is really in the first chapter. So that's the situation. I'm stranded on Mars. I have no way to communicate with Hermes, that's the ship that he came on, or Earth. Everyone thinks I'm dead. I'm in a hab designed to last 31 days. If the oxygenator breaks down, I'll suffocate. If the water reclaimer breaks down, I'll die of thirst. If the hab breaches, I'll just kind of explode. And if none of those things happen, I'll eventually run out of food and starve to death. Sorry about my typos. I did my voice to text thing and missed some apparently. So I'm sure it's the accent. Okay, so what's at stake for this character here? His life. I mean, he lists it out. If this happens, I'm going to die. If this happens, I'm going to die. If this happens, I'm going to die. So the stakes are really high for him. It is his life. But not everything is life and death in fiction. So here's back to our Ellie and Jenny Penny again. Okay, I'm going to read this really quickly. This is early in the book as well. We find out what's at stake for Ellie and why Jenny Penny becomes so important. I sat there thinking about that night. My parents had crept into my room and said, "We want to talk to you about something, something your brother keeps saying to you, about you being a mistake." "Oh, that," I said. "Well, you weren't a mistake," said my mother, "just unplanned. We weren't really expecting you to turn up, that is." "Like Mr. Harris," I said, a man who always seemed to know when we were about to sit down and eat. "Sort of," said my father. "Like Jesus?" "Exactly," said my mother carelessly. "Exactly like Jesus. It was like a miracle when you arrived, the best miracle ever." My dad put his papers back into his battered briefcase and sat next to me. "You don't have to go to Sunday school or church for God to love you," he said, "or for anyone to love you. You know that, don't you?" "Yes," I said, not believing him. "You'll understand that more as you get older," he added. I couldn't wait that long. I'd already resolved that if this God wouldn't love me, then it was clear I needed to find another one that could. All right, so she's just been off to Sunday school, got herself into a whole lot of trouble by bringing up the fact that that Jesus was an accident, is what happened, and got herself into trouble. But what's at stake for her is she has left that experience with the impression that God doesn't love her. And if God doesn't love her, then she needs to find someone who will. And then in comes this character, Jenny Penny. So what's at stake for her is she is looking for someone who will love her. So so when we get to that phone call and Jenny Penny is going to disappear from her life, we know what's at stake for her. It's not just, "Oh, okay, well, I'll see you when I see you." This is the person that has kind of been the glue for her whole childhood who's going to disappear. So the stakes, again, not life and death, but for, I think, a 8 or 10-year-old girl, huge stakes to lose the one person who understands and sees her. Okay, so can Ellie find someone to love her if God won't, are the stakes in this book? Okay, so all mixed up in there is this idea of a ticking clock. And you probably heard this idea that there's a bomb with a ticking clock and the reader doesn't know it. So um, they get the sense that this bomb is going to go off at some point, and we're reading forward to find out if what needs to happen is going to happen before this quote unquote bomb goes off. So the bomb isn't obviously a literal bomb. It could be an important event that the character needs to solve a problem before this event, or some other deadline. Perhaps it's a departure. Something has to happen before somebody important to them leaves. Or perhaps it's something they need to do before someone dies. So the ticking clock is something that must happen before X happens in the story. And in The Martian here, his ticking clock is pretty clear again. He's got food for 31 days. The mission was supposed to be 31 days. So they built in some redundancy. So enough food for the crew to last 56 days. Um, they were 6 days in before this thing happened. It all blew up. So basically, he's got 300 days to figure out how to get off planet Mars, how to be rescued, because he's not going to get off under his own steam. But how is he going to be rescued from Mars? He's got 300 days to survive to figure it out. So from that second forward, that clock is ticking down. And if you remember in the first chapter, he marks it with a log, and we can see the days literally ticking down before we know his food is going to run out and he's going to starve. So that how can he survive 300 days and figure out getting off the planet? That's our ticking bomb. Okay, so wrapped up in this idea of emotions is this emotional resonance. And so that question that we ask at the start of the story is what pulls us through. What we want as a reader to be emotionally invested. So our stakes that we set up for the character pulls the reader in, gets them invested in the story early. In order to keep the reader engaged emotionally, We want to do that in scene rather than a lot of exposition. So we want to be in the scene with the character, experiencing the story along with them. This idea of reaction, decision, action. So what does that mean? It means we're in a scene, something happens to the character and they react. And we spend time with that reader and we feel how they react to what has just happened. From that point, that reaction, they make a decision, and from there, they take the next action. So we as the reader are coming along with them because we understand how those actions, those events in the story made them feel. We've seen and felt that reaction. We've seen and felt them make that decision and take the next action. It pulls the reader along into the story with that character. So, emotional resonance, I can't say the word, I'm going to use a different title next time. But this emotion is what pulls us into stories, right? We want to feel how the character feels as they experience this story. So we want to use our senses, our sensory references. We want to feel what this character is feeling as they make their way through the story. It keeps the reader invested. It keeps us moving forward. And again, you want to do that in scene because when you zoom out and tell the reader how the character feels, you've immediately created that distance and made the reader sort of watch what is happening rather than be there in the story with the character and moving through the story with them. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water if they'll excuse me. Okay, so the next ingredient is action. And so I said right up front that pacing is not necessarily fast-moving action, fast-moving events, things happening, car chases. Now, Shirin and I always joke about her sedan chase, this action-packed scene, but that's not necessarily what you need to keep your reader coming through the story. We also have this idea of action and introspection, and both of them have a place in your story. So action is what propels the plot. We see the readers, the protagonist, what I just said before, they are experiencing events, they're reacting, they're making decisions, and they're taking the next step. They're moving to the next action. So this is what propels the plot forward. So here's a little very short scene where this character is taking action, and we are with her in this scene as she takes this step that she's been setting up in the story to take. So this is Rowan again, the woman who washed up on shore. And she's been taken in by this family on this island and started to get an idea that maybe something is not quite right with them and with what's going on there. So I take the spray bottle out of my pack and creep into the kitchen. We're in action. Raph is asleep in the other room, but I don't make a sound in case he's a light sleeper. I look around at the space, not knowing where to start. The bleach smell, excuse me, the bleach smell is pretty much gone now. I spray the sink first, but the luminol sits invisibly on the surface and then evaporates. I spray the bench tops, same again. But when I spray the floor, the liquid turns bright, the luminescence, the luminescent blue. I spray and spray, and the blue gets brighter and thicker and covers the entire kitchen floor. And I realize I'm wiping my tears with one hand and squeezing with the other, and the chemical has run out. What's this? A voice says, and I wail in fright. Raph is standing in the dark, staring at the blue floor. What's that? He demands. My mind races trying to think what to tell him, but I can't come up with a lie fast enough. It's blood, I say. Eee! Okay, so we're in the scene with her. She is taking action. She is has a suspicion about something having gone on in this room. She's got luminol, and she's going to go and find out if her suspicions are true, that there is blood on the floor in this room and that something has happened there. So we see her in action. We feel that too. We feel even though we feel the tension in there. We feel her exasperation as it doesn't show up at first, and so she goes on spraying and she's spraying and spraying and spraying until it runs out. So a lot of tension in this scene. Small action. She walks into a room and sprays a few surfaces, but we get so much happening in this scene. And again, this action that we go through with her brings up more questions like, whose blood is that? Yeah, how did she know it was there? We want to turn the page and see what happens next, especially as now she's also been caught. But there's also room in stories for introspection. And what introspection does is it provides breadth and depth. It lets us into the head of the character, and it acts as sort of a natural break. It lets the reader take a little breath and sort of slow down a bit. But what you can do in introspection is get to know that character better through their interiority. And again, as a reader, we're still analyzing, we're looking at everything that happens, everything that the character tells us, everything that's going on in their heads, and we're analyzing and putting the pieces together. So even though introspection can really slow things down, if it's done well, your reader is still engaged. They're still asking those questions. They're still making meaning out of what they're being told. And so Wild Dark Shore again has action scenes, like the one I just read, but it also has scenes where we get to take a breath and we get to know this character in a really intimate way. So this is Dominic, and Dominic is the man who saved her life, who the man she saw when she first opened her eyes after she'd been saved. And here's just a very short little paragraph of introspection from Dominic. He says, "What I miss most is not any of the things I expected. It's having someone to talk to about our children. The hilarious things they say and do, the insights with which they blow my mind, and the ways they change frequently and without mercy. I need her to help me process and deliberate and delight. I want to laugh with her, to be awestruck with her. I want her to look at me and wonder, acknowledging what profound creations we have made together. What I miss is having someone to look at in moments like these, someone who understands not just the talent or cleverness of our children, but the wisdom, the immensity of feeling they hold within. Instead, I marvel them alone." So in just a very short paragraph, and I probably should have set up that Dominic's wife died before the story started, but we really get, this like rugged man who's living alone on this island, but in this just very small moment of introspection, we just get it to take a step back and understand, what he really makes him tick. And for me in this book, this was such an endearing scene because now we see a different side of Dominic. So as the story unfolds, we see that he has this very gentle, loving, lonely side to him, which is going to play out in the story. But it's also given us a chance to just step back and just take a little breather before the story moves on. So introspection, although it acts as a break, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And again, like we talked about right at the beginning, depending on what genre you're writing in, this can really help you uh, if you don't have a lot of action in your story, this is going to help you get deeper into those characters and get the reader more engaged at that level, at that emotional level. So a really useful tool. Okay, so as you put it all together, we go back to this Goldilocks principle and finding just the right speed for your specific genre. And how do you figure that out? You figure that out, the way you figure out most writing problems is by reading in your genre. So even if you take a thriller, for example, you've got everything from a more slow burn, more sort of suspensey, psychological thriller to, the fast pace, bombs going off, buildings exploded, heroes running in and out. So a big sort of a spectrum of even within genres. So reading in your genre, finding your comps and reading those and watching how the pacing moves throughout the story. At what point does the author let you take a little breath? At what point do you find yourself turning those pages? And when you look back, what was it that was on those pages that was making you do that, that was making you not want to stop reading? Excuse me. And you want to vary your pacing throughout the book, like I said, so that you can rest the reader at times. You never want to make the reader bored, so they put the book down, but they might just need an emotional break. So, oops, sorry. So you want to pace, to vary your pacing throughout the book. But no matter what kind of story you're writing, as you approach that climactic scene, that pacing is going to escalate. Your scenes are going to get shorter, your emotional tension is going to increase, the stakes that you've set up are going to increase as you propel your reader to that climactic scene. So here is the climactic scene of When God Was a Rabbit. So spoiler alert, I'm sorry, but you have to know this in order to understand what I'm trying to say. So what happens in the book is Ellie's brother disappears. He was in the Twin Towers, they think, during 9/11, but they don't know. His diary said that's where he was supposed to be. But he's been missing and they don't know. So here at the climactic scene is what happens. And Arthur is a friend of the family who's kind of taken up residence in their house. So Arthur, get back, I shouted as he fell close to the side. Again, thunder and lightning, triumph, the splintering sound of fracture tore through the valley, the loud thump of rain as it hit the river surface before being enveloped by the rising mass. So again, a lot of tension in this scene, a lot of atmosphere and weather. Nelson shook as the dog shook behind Arthur's leg, and again Arthur shouted out into the storm at the loss of his gentle boy he'd feel no more. I didn't hear my phone ring, not the first time, the thunderous noise maybe, or the inconsistent signal that faltered during storms. But as the storm moved over and left us with the feeble spray of sunlit rain, that's when I heard it, the ring suddenly echoing amidst the sheer exhaustion of the scarred river valley. Allie, the voice said. Charlie? Ellie, they found him. The moment I'd waited for, I held my stomach, my legs suddenly shaking. I reached for Arthur's hand. What had they found? What thing had they found that had declared him, him? And as if he could read my silence, he quickly said, No, Ellie, they found him. He's alive. Da, 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 da. So what she's done in this scene is created, a lot of atmospheric tension. We feel the emotion of Arthur, who's lost this boy that he loved. We get the phone that's not working, so a lot of tension building, and then this moment when she hears that Charlie tell her that they found him. She holds her stomach, her legs are shaking. We feel that emotion that this brother that she has been missing so long has been found. So as you're reading that scene, you can feel it's like, the pace is building. You're if you were turning the pages, you'd be reading to the end of the page as fast as you could to see what this phone call is going to tell her. Okay, so all right, what kills pace in a story? All right, here are several things. So the first is info dumps, and especially at the start of the story, I think we're often guilty of this, of kind of trying to shovel in everything that the reader needs to know to understand the story. And even later on, at any point in the book, anytime that you're dumping information on the reader, it just slows that pace down. So how can you find ways to drip that information in? What can you delete, especially in your early scenes, that still keeps the story moving forward, but without the reader having to know absolutely everything. And if you look at some of your favorite books, the kind of books that you've been hooked on from the very first page, it's amazing how little you know. That the author just will drip out just enough information to keep you intrigued. They'll ask those that to sort of set up those little questions that you as the reader have to then read on to find out. And the information that you need to understand the world, the characters, the situation that is being set up in the book gets dripped out, and you keep reading on and taking it in and turning the next page. So info dumps, they put the brakes on. Along similar to info dumps are big chunks of backstory. And I'm going to be honest that this is something that's taken me a long time to figure out how to do. Uh, Part of that is from the way that I write, and write a lot from prompts and write a lot of backstory first, so that I really understand these characters. And then because I've written it and it was so brilliant, I want to put it in the book. So inevitably, I'll have a chunk of backstory that moves further and further into the back of the book until eventually I have to admit that it doesn't belong and it's a darling and I have to delete it and I shall miss it. But so chunks of backstory, again, they pull the reader right out of the story that you set up. All those questions that they want answered, suddenly they have to wait for. So you're like, hold on, I'm going to, I need to stop the story while I explain to you everything you need to understand about this character. So again, backstory is we need it. We need to understand where these characters come from, but there's an art to it. It still must need to move the story. We don't need to know everything about how the character was as a child unless it relates to the story you're telling us now. So it needs to be essential. It needs to move the story forward so that we can use that information to answer a question later in the story. It needs to come just when the reader needs to know it. So we don't need to set it up in the beginning so that they know absolutely everything. And the trick is to sort of break it down and weave it into your story so that your narrative keeps moving forward, but you keep sort of like dipping below the surface and picking up these little stitches of backstory that start to weave together who this character is and what about their past is important to who they are now. Okay, the next one, and I apologize for my graphic, but I couldn't resist, is navel gazing. So navel gazing is where your character goes off into these long periods of introspection, something else that I love to write and then have to delete. But they're just musing, they're musing on what's happening, musing on another character, musing on who they are, but there's no tension in this musing. There's no anxiety, if you like, in the musing. There's no meaning in what they're musing about. They're just sort of, drifting off for pages and pages and emptying the contents of their minds onto the page for you. And that's something else that just stops the narrative. So again, when you get into that introspection, it's got to have meaning and it's got to have tension. Otherwise, you're going to lose your reader. All right, what else slows a story down? So smooth sailing is the death of narrative. If you have long periods where there is no conflict, where everything's going well for your character, your reader's going to start losing interest. Start, looking out the window. Again, it becomes something of an information dump, even if that character is in action and in scene. Without that conflict, it starts to slow down, it starts to bog down, and your reader loses interest. So conflict, always there in every scene. So vagueness is another thing that slows down pacing, because specific details make the reader's brain engage. They're picturing what a specific item looks like. When a character walks into a room and notices a specific detail, just one little detail can be enough to sort of ping in the reader's mind and make them start to imagine the rest of the room. And vagueness isn't always mysterious. So sometimes, a good example of what I mean by that is when she thought about that thing that happened 8 years ago, and off she goes. And for the reader, that's just like, what? That's infuriating. It's so vague, it's not mysterious, and it does actually the opposite of getting our interest. It just makes the reader frustrated. But those specifics, again, we're engaging the reader's brain, we're making them think, we're putting meaning to things, and specific details are what creates that. Redundant beats. We want to make sure often that our reader understands what we're trying to say, so we say it three different ways. We show it in a scene, we have somebody tell somebody else about it, and then we have somebody else thinking about it because we want to make sure the reader gets it. Our readers are smart. I mean, they come to books because they want to be engaged in somebody else's life, and they come with the expectation of looking for meaning. And so they're picking up what you're putting on the page. They're looking at every single word. And so when you repeat things in different ways to make sure that the reader's getting it, it just really, really slows things down for the reader, and they start to get frustrated. We don't want frustrated readers. Um, Another thing that slows down the pace of a book is over description or purple prose. So when you have to describe every single detail of a room or everything the character was wearing and how they walked and the color of their hair, you're losing the reader, because again, if you give them a few small details, the reader then forms the rest of the picture for themselves, and that's engaging their brain because they're pulling from their own experiences. So if a tall man with a handlebar mustache, the reader is going to pull that from their own experiences and their own imaginations to paint the picture of that character. And so again, their brains are engaged. They are working, and when their brains are busy, the book feels like it's moving along. So when you over describe everything, you leave no room for the reader to come in and create their own pictures. Okay, so finally, a couple of kind of technical tricks that can create the illusion of speed in a book. So when you get to those key scenes, for example, the climax scene that I read, you want the reader to feel like the story is going faster. Or if you've got a very exciting scene, might want to make that feel like it's moving faster. So a few technical tricks that are on the page that give this illusion of speed. So creating white space on a page. When you turn over a page, or the reader turns over a page and sees a full block of text, that can, especially if you're at a slower pace in the book, feel like, oh, you know what? I think I'll just put my bookmark in here and I'll go and switch over the laundry. So you don't want your reader to do that. But you could create white space, which makes the text it feels lighter, and it feels like it's moving faster. You can do that with paragraph breaks, with using dialogue, which looks much more slender on the page. And so you give the text, it feels lighter for the reader. You do that also with your scene length. Shorter scenes tend to move faster because you're still making a complete scene, and at the end of that scene, you're hopefully leaving your reader with some kind of hook or question that's going to move them into the next scene. So shorter scenes make everything move along. And when you get to those scenes that you want to move faster, where you're getting to your climactic moments, minimizing the setting, or at least making it work for the mood of the book, is going to make those scenes feel faster. So this is that first page of The Martian again. And you can see what I'm talking about with white space. He's got very short paragraphs, one sentence paragraphs, short sentences. It's very clipped. You feel the tension and the sort of anxiety in that scene, and that page just feels very light. So using your chapter breaks, because again, at the end of the chapter, what you want to do is make that reader say, "Oh, I'll just read just one more chapter, and then I'll put it down." And so at the end of each chapter, you want to give that reader a reason to keep reading. So maybe it's a cliffhanger, maybe it's a zingy punchline, or maybe it's a question that is asked at the end of the chapter, not a literal question, but a question that your character is sort of asking at the end of the scene, at the end of the chapter, that's going to make the reader want to read on to find out what the answer to that question is. Maybe a shift in momentum. It's whatever it takes that is some kind of hook ending that's going to pull your reader into the next chapter. So verbal economy is another way that we can create speed. So when we use a lot of filter words like he saw, he felt, they wondered, um, it puts a distance at the reader. And if when we're talking about reader engagement on an emotional level, the closer your reader is to the character, the more engaged they're going to be, and they're going to be pulled along with that character. So whenever you put in these filter words, you're making that distance between the reader and the character, so everything feels like it's just a little bit slower. So something to look for at the editing stages if you need to get your narrative moving along a little bit. Okay, so how do you do this in your own book? How do you check your own work and see if the pacing feels right? So a general rule of thumb is if you're bored, the reader's bored. So if you take 10 pages and read, and sometimes even if if you've read this 100 times, you might think, well, of course I'm bored. I know exactly what happens. But when you if you try this test and read 10 pages and you find those 10 pages where you are engaged, no matter how many times you've read your own book, if if that pacing is right, if you're engaged, if you are doing what you want the reader to do, those 10 pages are going to fly no matter how many times you've read them. If they're not, look at where you're starting to skim. Look at where your mind is starting to wander. Maybe you're going to your to-do list or you're staring out the window, but look at those areas where you start to skim your own work and see what's missing. Are you connecting to the character? Do you have a question in this scene that you're trying to answer that the reader wants to see answered? All those things that we've talked about, are they there on your page? And finally, pacing is a contract that you make with your reader. And if you keep your side of the bargain, then they will stay with you until the very end. All right. So I've sort of zipped through that a little bit, but we have lots of room for questions.
Okay, well, everyone should know the rules. If you can raise your hand using the digital prompt, that makes it easiest for me. But if you don't want to do that, um, Lisa, if you stop sharing your screen so I can see everyone again, then we can actually look for raised hands as well. So does anyone have anything to start with? Lori.
Oh, Lisa, thank you. That was amazing. No surprise there. But I'm wondering, when you first draft a story, are you conscious of pacing? And you're thinking as you write it, I really need to make this super fast, or I really need to hook the reader with X, or does pacing really come more in revision?
So for me, for the way that I write, it comes in revision. It's actually probably comes pretty late in revision uh, because there's so many other things I'm trying to get into place first. So because I write in the mystery, thriller, suspense genre, my plot is really important. Fortunately, I have lots of questions that need to be answered in that kind of story. So yeah, there's a lot that I'm getting in place first. And I think the pacing comes from a full read for me where you're doing that litmus test, but for the whole book and figuring out like where am I losing interest here? And I'm a big believer in working in passes when you revise. So sort of a pacing pass is really good to do to really just see like when am I starting to lose interest in this story? And then what are the elements that are missing there at those points?
And just if I can follow up, so let's say that you're going through a pacing pass. Do you like have a checklist of things where you identify, do I have a ticking clock? Do I have these sort of these different elements that you talked about?
Not so much a checklist, but really just marking the places where things feel like they're bogging down, and then going back and just looking at that and figuring out like why is this bogging down? Is it that I'm not connecting to the character, so I don't understand what she's doing? That's a speaking from experience. Since there's a note that I got in my editorial letter, like I don't know why this character is making this decision. So that's something you need to go back, because you're losing the reader if you don't understand why the character's making the decisions that they make. So yeah, so doing a pacing pass and noticing where things start to feel slow, and then going back to the things that I just laid out. Is it a factor of me not being close enough to the character? Is it an emotional distance that's missing? Have I not set up enough questions? Is my character not making reacting, deciding, and moving on? So yeah, so and I don't have so much of a checklist as sort of a mental checklist, I guess.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Good, thanks.
Anybody else? Susan? Susan McCombs.
Susan Quallett, did you want to go?
It's all right. I'll call Susan Qualinace. Go on, Susan.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was looking back at the introspection. I'm always intrigued by that. Like how far do you go? What do you do? And I hadn't thought of it as acting as a natural break, and it does. It's this breadth and depth, and it just occurred to me, and maybe you do this all the time, but if you put together the introspection with the fast pace, I mean, that's really that's going to be a really good technique to use at times, right? When the person, usually I think of introspection as like, oh, what if this and that? But really, have you done that before where it could be the person's coming up with what's going on very, very quickly, or analyzing something quickly, or do you understand what I'm saying? Does that work, or does that get too confusing?
I think it can work, and certainly in sort of a high emotional scene, when I mean you could create a lot of tension in a scene by having your character sort of pull out and analyze and kind of notice details, and it's a situation where you can add tension by bringing in these details and bringing in the character and what's kind of going on in their head. I think if you had a really fast-paced though action scene, that kind of introspection would just slow it down. So I think there's definitely a balance. And if what you've got is kind of this action pace, uh, car chase, running through the streets kind of scene, I think you, if you get into your character's head and they start musing on what's going on in their world, I mean, I think it's just gonna grind it to a halt. But I mean, that's sort of two extremes there. But I think definitely. I mean, when your characters are always in action, right? Or almost always in action, which is what is going to drive your narrative forward. Because as soon as they sit down and muse over their cup of coffee, everything slows down. But it is that blend of that introspection and that interiority as they're moving through the action of the story.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
going
just
to
gonna
try it.
jump in and
Yeah.
add like that there's actually a difference also between introspection and interiority. And a lot of times the words are used interchangeably, but when
Mhm.
you're introspective, where introspection usually refers to like Lisa uses the word mulling. where you're contemplating, where it's like being processed. But interiority just means putting a mic inside your protagonist's head. So even in very, very high speed chase scenes, you can just like you can have like little two-word glimpses of interiority, and you can see how that character is looking. Like, where is the eye going? And you can build so much tension when you can see from glimpses that they're looking for an escape valve out of their situation. You see what I mean?
I
So,
do. I think it
yeah.
would be so much. I had never considered this, but I think it would be fun to write. They do it on television where they show you what the person is thinking with a blump, 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 but
Yeah.
dwarf, dragon, sword kind of thing. I don't know if they hadn't noticed before. Yeah, I'm going to try it because thank you for bringing that
I think
up.
that
It's
would be fun to play
safety.
around with and see
Yes,
what it feels like.
I combine some of these.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and
And then,
that's right. The interiority, introspection, mulling.
right. And
Actually,
then there's also for your kind of writing, especially Susan, the fact that perception um, is often an underused way of telling you about character, right? Like what your character is
yeah.
looking at, what they're paying attention to, tells you so much about where they are in that moment, and it's kind of, I think, underutilized. But before I keep going on here, sorry to have jumped in on that, but Susan Koala, you had a question?
Uh, well, first of all, I have a really big thank you to both of you, because you've really helped me throughout this process to understand what I had done wrong. But this particular class tonight, literally, I could give you an example of each one of the things you said do not do that I did. And then all of a sudden, I did what you said. I took the first 5 chapters and I read them and I bored myself to death. And so I realized that what I had done was I had created all this backstory and I loved these characters, but it was not a compelling story. The reader is going to be like, who are these people and why do they matter? And so I have gone back and rewritten, from the start, and I'm working my way through. But the pain of cutting out that backstory of these people that I just love so much, but you're like, it doesn't matter. So, but great advice that you've given tonight. Thank you.
So the great thing is about backstory is it's never wasted. I mean, it's really important. You need to do it and write it and understand who these characters are. But when you make that big painful slash and you take it out of your story, it it's not really going out of your story because it's all there in your head. You know now who those characters are, where they came from. So when they walk into a situation and they see something happening, you have all that backstory that makes them interpret that event in a certain way and in a way that a different character would not interpret. So it's never lost work, but it is painful to kill, especially if it was really cool backstory that you wrote. But it's never really lost.
But the advice you've given tonight is just spot on. I mean, I think I've made, literally about 80% of those mistakes and had to go back and really rewrite and
Yeah.
understand from the compelling part. Read it and really see, do you find this compelling? Because
Yeah.
if if you don't, then and I didn't.
And that's a skill to take off your author hat as with your beloved characters and all the great things that you made happen in this story and actually read your manuscript as a reader. And I mean, I'm sure you've all heard the advice of getting distance from your book, taking time off, and then reading it in a different format. So whether that's printing it out or I have a software called Vellum that'll format it into a book and then I can read it on my tablet so it looks like a formatted book and it changes the way your brain works and you just see your work so differently when you read it as if I had just pulled this book off the shelf and paid good money for it and sat down with my cup of tea ready to read it, would I keep reading? is it compelling? And so it's definitely just a mindset shift to move from writer to reader, but an important one.
But thank you.
You're welcome.
Monica, you have a question.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. First of all, thank you for doing this. I echo the comments of especially about the backstory. I'm getting much more appreciative of doing more out of the story work and then finding that it somehow appears there in really odd ways than expecting. It's really fun.
Yeah.
I have a question about second person because it can get very introspective.
Mm.
Yeah, and maybe lots of interiority. But do you have any suggestions for balancing the pacing in a second person uh,
Mm.
story? And I write short stories mostly.
Okay. Okay. Yes, second person. So that's something I've actually never written in. So I'm going a little cold on this one. But I think again applying that litmus test and am I engaged with this character and what they are telling me in this story? Um, am I am I picking up enough little breadcrumbs that make me curious and want to read on? So I think that that it applies no matter which point of view you're choosing. You want to be setting up those questions for your reader. And in a short story, I mean, that's a lot of what a short story is posing those questions for the reader to read on and answer. So I think I think you apply the same test no matter what length of work, and if it's less than 10 pages, well, you can still apply the test. I'm not sure if that was helpful or not.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Good.
There's like this trick that some people do. I tried it once in a very early draft because I was writing in third, and a lot of people find that when they take third and turn it into first, that it can tighten up considerably because the immediacy of the first person point of view makes you drop things that you have more time in third to like spend on like description and everything that doesn't come straight through the eyes and the experience of the protagonist. So it'd be interesting, second person is hard to write, so hats off to you that you're trying to write it. But maybe a flip into first person just as an exercise and then flipping it back might help.
It's a great suggestion. And you're right. Well, as soon as you get into first person, I mean, all that interiority, that emotional resonance that you're looking for, it should be there because you're right in the head of your character.
Susan McCombs, is that a
I just
finger
want to,
up?
yeah, I just want to add to that. I'm thinking that isn't that where I really liked how you phrased that illusion of speed. I never thought of it as an illusion, but I think when you think in the second person, using varying those sentences and very short sentences, all of that would really change up the pacing in and be unexpected because because second person does feel very reflective, self-reflective.
Mm.
And so to have that, I don't know, I think, or am I wrong? Do you think that would work? Giving those illusion of speed tricks to it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, using paragraph breaks is one of my favorite tricks because it takes a big block of text and it breaks it up and it forces the reader to move on to the next paragraph.
Mm.
And so, I mean, I think it adds a sense of urgency. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely that's something that you could do. And you say the sentence structure, shorter sentences if that's what you're trying to do to, I mean, are you worried, Monica, about it being too slow and too, or you're not really sure?
Well, yeah, I mean, it can get bogged down. Sometimes as you're talking about this, sometimes what I do to change it up is I do some dialogue.
Mhm.
And that get sometimes especially just the use of the word you, uh, because the you it can get really to the point where you've got you in every sentence and it feels really strange.
Hmm.
So
I think it can feel sort of accusatory as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And
so somehow trying to get out, on the one hand, you're in that person's head, but trying to move out of it in different ways is that's what I try. And I do think it's hard in second person to establish a sense that you're close to character, because the character is usually distant from themselves
Mhm.
in second person. And so, um, but yeah, those and the shorter sentences I think probably are good because you don't use as many yous in those.
Yeah, and it's something you can sort of just play around with. And somebody had asked, and Karen had asked in the chat, by the way, about second person is not the same as omniscient. It's when you are referring to, as you said, you
Mm,
did this, you did that.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, omniscience is a version of third. It's a distant third.
Yeah.
But second is, yeah, it's very, very kind of, I've always been intrigued by it. I read a really good piece once that was in second person, and when it's done well, it's so refreshing because it's so different.
Mhm.
But like I said, hats off that you're trying it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's a challenge. Laurie, you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to add, I don't want to belabor second person stuff, but I just wanted to add, to me, second person can be really powerful. You're addressing someone as you. And I guess one of the questions is like, who is that audience that the narrator is addressing? I'm thinking the first time I ever read anything in second person, it was Jay McInerney's book, Bright Lights, Big City, where there's a really decadent narrator. He's got everything, he's got the world by the tail, and he's clubbing his way through New York, and he's addressing you, and if I remember right, he's addressing himself about like you do this and you do this, and you think, this guy is completely messed up. What's he withholding from me? Why isn't he telling certain things to himself? Why isn't he being honest? I know he's not. What secret is he hiding? So it's getting back to the stuff that Lisa talked about the big question. Like you just keep reading to try to figure this out. And at the very end, he reveals it and it's like, oh my gosh, look at that, so it can be a really powerful thing. Um, and the other thing I wanted to mention, this is not about second person. Susan McCombs talked about the illusion of pacing. And what I was thinking about, I'm reading Elizabeth Strout's newest book, which is called The Things We Never Say. Devastatingly sad. I can hardly wait to finish it, just to get behind it. It's so good. But Elizabeth Strout is just this master of moving things along. I always think that I have to, with my pacing, I have to fill in all the blanks, getting a character from A to B to C to D, and she goes from A to D very elegantly, and you don't miss anything, and it keeps the pacing going. So it's really interesting. It's almost like little mini scenes, and they all connect. I make that jump as a reader. She trusts me to do that, and it's really quite lovely.
I think it is interesting to go back to the books that were for you, the books that you couldn't put down, and that's different for all of us, and pick it apart. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do when a book really works well is to dissect it ruin it forever. But if you've already read it and loved it, you've had that benefit. But to pick it apart and see like what is making this book work? What is she doing that's enabling her, as you say, to jump from A to D without losing the reader? And it sounds like that, something that she's is putting in the minimal information that you need to get you there. She's not having to take you step by step by step and sort of trusting that that her readers will get there.
Yep,
So
exactly.
when you get to the end and you've recovered from it, you can go back and pick it apart and see what she did.
Okay, that's a good assignment. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay.
Anybody else? Oh, yes, Mary, Kit.
Hi. Yeah, I've been doing this weird thing lately. I don't know if anybody uses Speechify. Does anybody use that? Yeah. Basically, it'll read your file out loud, to you, and I listen to it, and I I pay attention when Gwyneth Paltrow is one of the readers, when Gwyneth gets excited. And that's my goal. It's like, yay, okay, Gwyneth liked that part. So I have noticed that.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're listening to the book, and even if it's, it's not a trained live
Right.
narrator who will bring all that emotion in, you can still feel when things start to drag. You can still feel when it
Yeah.
slows down. And again, that's sort of changing the format of the way that you read your work that you're familiar with. Having somebody read it to you like that, you hear things that you don't necessarily see when you're just reading on the page.
You're also guaranteed to hear it if you read it yourself to a live audience.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the best exercise is to read to a live audience, the very, very key bits, your opening scene, your apex scene, your this scene or that scene, and you can tell the moment. You can tell when you have them in your hand, and you can tell the moment they're slipping from you. So, yeah,
Yeah.
read,
Yeah, I mean,
read it out.
if you're in the Bay Area, there are a lot of opportunities for open mics. I know there's one in Marin, Writers Night Out, I think it's the second Tuesday of every month. And you get about 5 minutes to read to a friendly audience and to get
Usually
up
involves us.
and usually involves us, yeah. So we're very friendly. But as Shirin said, yeah, when you get up there and you read, especially when you read polished work, and then you're sitting there with your pen editing as you go. Yeah, because you feel when you've got your audience, you feel when they're leaning forward and listening and when they're leaning back and you know looking for cobwebs in the ceiling. So yeah, that's a great way to test out your work. Yeah.
Nancy, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, both of you. My question, Lisa, I just not sure I heard what you said few toward the beginning of the questions. You said something about being able to access a program that will show it as a book, show your text.
Oh,
As
yeah,
a
yeah.
book. I'm ignorant of what that is.
It's called vellum.
Vellum?
Vellum, like
Yeah.
like the see-through paper. Yeah, I mean it's not a free program. I've used it. I've self-published some books, so I've used that to format the books. It's really great. It's really user-friendly. But I use it all the time when I want to read my book my manuscript in a different format.
And that brings another, could you say something about how that process feels different to you when you are self-publishing as opposed to when you're working with a publisher and an editor?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
imagine quite different.
yeah, and it is quite different. And I've spoken about self-publishing and the importance of making sure that you raise the bar on yourself and hiring an editor that is going to do those things that you can't do for your own book. I mean, you just can't see. You get to a point where you just can't see what's not working in your own work. So hiring an editor is an essential part of the self-publishing process. But it is different, I think, from being edited by an editor who has skin in the game, frankly, who's, they're not just work for hire, but their reputation for the books that they produce is on the line too. So yeah, it's a good experience. It's good to feel like you're that you've got a team behind your book and you're not just going solo.
But also with their editing for their readers. They already have readers for you.
Yeah,
Do you know there?
exactly.
Which is
Yeah.
can be a little frustrating if you that wasn't what you were going for, but it's wonderful too. They know who they're marketing it to, and so they're editing that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
To
Good
go
question.
back to that idea of formatting your pages and that being important, though, Erin has pointed out that you can also do it on Scrivener if you use Scrivener. But I just
Yeah,
wanted
can, yeah.
to take a moment and say, like, we have, Lisa and I have a very good friend who also writes thrillers, and she um, analyzes her page turns to the extent that she lays out her book and makes sure that she has like the right rhythm, that her kind of like her little page turning moments are coming so that they will land more or less on the bottom half of the right hand page as she flicks. So it's like it's really important. Book designers do it all the time. If you're going to self-publish, you know, kind of try and be aware that these are things that book designers take into account, like how much space. We were talking earlier about how paragraph breaks, force you to take a break, force you to move on to the next thing. But the paragraph break down to the design on the page, how much distance you allow between sections, whether you're going to put a little doohickey in to make sure that that section is stressed, all of those things make a huge, huge difference. And I have kind of a design background, so I just kind of took it for granted. But I was giving my notes back um, to my publisher who just gave me my interior pages. And Lewis, looking over my shoulder, said to me, "Oh, you really should make a point of letting your writers know that, because some of them are probably not even thinking in terms of the edit. Like my edit was not anything about words. My edit was, I think that these, breaks need to have a bit more air in them so that we're really feeling the distance between sections more. They're a bit too crowded. Or I've written like one chapter that is any typesetter's nightmare, but because it's like very, very short sentences, but they're actually meant to be staccato. I want them coming to you like boom, and then the next one, boom. And I don't want them running together like one paragraph. All of that is handled in design by how much space you're allowing in between your text. So if you are, all I'm saying is that if you are self-publishing, try and spend a little time to get at least aware of these things that you should be considering when you put it through the meat grinder and just kind of churn out a book and plop it onto Amazon. That there are these things that can help you actually with the pacing, because this is a workshop on pacing. With the pacing of your book, the visual design actually enters into that too. Okay, have I confused you even more, Nancy? Anybody else? We got to the end of the question jar. All right, well, we have 3 minutes to spare, so I'm going to take those 3 minutes. Thank you very much, Lisa. That was a great presentation. And Lisa and I teach together often, but I have never seen this presentation before, and I completely enjoyed it. So thank you very much. I had lots of notes, and I've lots to take home for. Too late for this book, but maybe for the next one.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And as I said in the beginning, I created this presentation because I needed to teach myself about pacing so that I don't get that note in an editorial letter anymore. So yeah, I'm really glad you found it helpful. And as always, I appreciate you inviting me, Shirin. Always fun and a great group.
You're very welcome. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. If you guys didn't keep showing up, we wouldn't keep doing this. So please sign up again. Hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.